Joseph.
They found his shoes first, not scattered, not torn, placed neatly side by side on a rock ledge 500 feet above the trail where he had vanished. The laces were still tied. The soles showed almost no wear. They looked like shoes that had been set down carefully by someone who intended to come back for them, except the boy who wore them was 3 years old. He could not have climbed to that ledge. No 3-year-old could. Search and rescue professionals who later examined the terrain described it as Class 4 technical climbing, requiring ropes and equipment and skills that take years to develop. The shoes were not the strangest thing they found. 4 years after Jaryd Atadero disappeared on a sunny October afternoon in Colorado, hikers discovered his clothing scattered across that impossible mountainside. His jacket, his pants, his underwear. Every piece had been turned inside out, not ripped off by an animal, not torn by branches or rocks. Carefully, deliberately, turned inside out, and left on a slope where no toddler could walk. No predator would carry prey. No explanation could reach. His skull fragments were found nearby. A single tooth. Enough to confirm through DNA that these were the remains of the boy who vanished on October 2nd, 1999. Not enough to explain what happened to him. Not enough to explain how his body reached a place his legs could never carry him. Not enough to explain why his clothing was removed and inverted with a precision that suggests intention rather than accident. The official cause of death remains undetermined. The official explanation remains non-existent. And the questions that Jaryd Atadero left behind have never been answered. This is not a story about one missing child. This is a story about a pattern that appears in national parks and forests across North America. A pattern involving children who vanish in moments, from locations where disappearance should be impossible. A pattern where search dogs lose trails that should be easy to follow. A pattern where bodies are found in places that defy physics and logic. A pattern where the things left behind make less sense than the disappearances themselves. The pattern has been documented for over a century. The pattern has never been explained. And the pattern continues. Every year, children vanish in American wilderness under circumstances that official investigations cannot account for. Some are found days later, miles from where they disappeared, with no memory of how they traveled distances that should have taken adult hikers days to cover. Some are never found at all, despite searches involving hundreds of people and the most advanced technology available. Some are found the way Jaryd Atadero was found, in pieces, in impossible places, with evidence that raises more questions than it answers. The cases we will examine share characteristics that researchers have identified across decades of documentation. The children are often very young, 2 to 7 years old. They disappear in moments, sometimes while parents are watching. Search dogs frequently cannot track them, losing the scent as if the child had been lifted from the ground. When remains are found, they are often in locations that the child could not have reached alone. These are not stories designed to frighten you. These are documented cases with official reports, witness statements, and physical evidence. The fear comes from the evidence itself, from what it shows, and from what it cannot explain. The Big South Trail, the Comanche Peak Wilderness, sits in the northern reaches of Colorado, a landscape of alpine meadows and granite peaks where the Rocky Mountains reach toward 13,000 feet. The area is remote but accessible, popular with day hikers who want to experience high country without technical climbing. On October 2nd, 1999, a group from a Christian singles organization staying at Poudre River Resort decided to take a short hike to a fish hatchery along the Big South Trail. Among them was Jaryd Atadero, a 3-year-old boy with blonde hair and blue eyes who had come to the resort with his father, Alan Atadero, and his older sister. Alan was not on the hike. He was working at the resort and had agreed to let Jaryd join the group for what he understood would be a short, easy walk to see the fish. What happened next would destroy his life and leave questions that 2 decades of investigation have failed to answer. The group that took Jaryd was composed of 12 adults, 12 adults responsible for one small boy on a trail that should have presented no danger. They walked approximately 1.3 miles from the trailhead, following a well-maintained path along the Cache-la-Poudre River. At some point during the hike, Jaryd walked ahead of the group. At some point during the hike, the adults lost sight of him. At some point during the hike, a 3-year-old boy vanished from a trail with 12 adults nearby, in broad daylight, in terrain that offered no place to hide. The exact circumstances of his disappearance remain unclear, because the accounts of the adults present have never fully aligned. Some said he was walking with 2 women at the front of the group. Some said he had fallen behind. Some said they saw him talking to other hikers on the trail. The inconsistencies are not evidence of deception. They are evidence of a group that was not paying attention, that assumed someone else was watching the child, that allowed a 3-year-old to slip away without anyone noticing the exact moment when he disappeared. The last confirmed sighting came from 2 hikers who were not part of the group. They encountered Jaryd walking alone on the trail, heading in the same direction as the group but separated from them by some distance. They noted that he seemed cheerful. They assumed his parents were nearby. They were the last people to see Jaryd Atadero alive. The search began within hours of the group returning to the resort without him. Alan Atadero learned that his son was missing when the group arrived at the parking lot and began asking each other where the boy was. No one knew. No one had seen him for at least an hour. No one could say with certainty where or when he had vanished. The initial search focused on the trail and the riverbank. The Cache-la-Poudre is a fast-moving mountain river, cold and dangerous even in autumn. The assumption was that Jaryd had wandered to the water and fallen in. Search teams walked the banks. Divers checked the pools. Dogs searched for any sign of the boy along the water edge. They found nothing. The search expanded. Over the following days, more than 3,000 volunteers joined professional search and rescue teams in combing the wilderness around the Big South Trail. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the canopy. Infrared equipment scanned for heat signatures. Every technique available in 1999 was deployed to find one small boy. They found nothing. The dogs were the first indication that something unusual had occurred. Search and rescue dogs are trained to follow human scent across virtually any terrain. They can track a person through dense forest, across streams, over rocky ground that holds no visible footprints. A 3-year-old boy, walking through mountain wilderness, should have left a scent trail that dogs could follow for miles. The dogs picked up Jaryd's scent at the point on the trail where he was last seen. They followed it for a short distance along the path. Then the trail ended. Not faded, not confused by water or wind. Ended. The handlers described the dog's behavior as confused. The animals circled the termination point, unable to find any continuation of the scent. One handler reported that his dog kept looking upward, as if the scent had gone into the air rather than along the ground. Dogs do not lie. Dogs do not have theories or expectations. They follow scent, and they indicate when scent is present and when it is not. The dogs indicated that Jaryd Atadero Trail stopped in the middle of a forest path, with no continuation in any direction, as if he had ceased to exist at that exact point, as if something had lifted him from the ground and carried him away. The search was suspended after 18 days. 3,000 people had covered every accessible area within miles of the disappearance point. They had found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a toy or a wrapper or any item that could be connected to a 3-year-old boy who had been walking that trail on October 2nd. Jaryd Atadero was declared missing, presumed dead. His father refused to accept that conclusion. The discovery. Alan Atadero spent the years following his son's disappearance, searching for answers. He returned to the Big South Trail repeatedly, walking the terrain, studying the topography, trying to understand what could have happened to a child who vanished in the presence of 12 adults. He also began researching similar cases. He discovered that Jaryd's disappearance shared characteristics with dozens of other cases involving children who vanished in national parks and forests. The sudden disappearance, the failure of search dogs to track, the absence of any physical evidence. The pattern was consistent enough that researchers had begun documenting it, compiling cases that defied conventional explanation. 4 years after Jaryd vanished, the answer came. Or rather, a partial answer that raised more questions than it resolved. In June of 2003, 2 hikers climbing in the Comanche Peak wilderness discovered clothing on a steep mountainside, approximately 500 feet above the Big South Trail. The clothing was scattered across a rocky slope that required technical climbing skills to access. It was not visible from the trail below. The hikers reported their discovery to authorities. Search teams were dispatched to recover the items. What they found would haunt investigators for years. The clothing included a jacket, pants, and underwear, consistent with what Jaryd Atadero had been wearing on the day he disappeared. DNA testing later confirmed that the items belonged to him. Every piece of clothing had been turned inside out. This detail has never been adequately explained. Predator attacks do not turn clothing inside out. Falls do not turn clothing inside out. Decomposition does not turn clothing inside out. The inversion of the clothing suggests deliberate action by something with the capability and intention to remove a child's clothes and reverse them. The location of the discovery was equally inexplicable. The slope where the clothing was found is not accessible to a 3-year-old child. It is barely accessible to adult climbers with experience and equipment. The terrain is steep, unstable, and covered with loose rock that would make ascent or descent extremely dangerous. Search and rescue professionals who examined the site stated that no toddler could have climbed to that location under their own power. Yet Jaryd's clothing was there. His cranial fragments were there. His tooth was there. Something had carried him to that impossible place. Something had removed his clothing and turned it inside out. Something had left his remains scattered across a mountainside where searchers had looked repeatedly without finding anything. The official investigation concluded that Jaryd had likely been killed by a mountain lion. This explanation accounts for some of the evidence. Mountain lions do occasionally attack small children. Mountain lions are capable of carrying prey to elevated locations. But the mountain lion explanation does not account for the clothing. Mountain lions do not remove clothing. They certainly do not turn clothing inside out. When mountain lions kill, they leave distinctive evidence: claw marks, bite patterns, scattered remains with clear signs of predation. The evidence found on that mountainside did not match typical mountain lion behavior. The official explanation also does not account for the search dogs. If Jaryd had been attacked by a mountain lion on the trail and dragged up the mountain, the dogs should have been able to follow that trail. Lion attacks are violent. They leave blood. They leave scent. They leave evidence that dogs can track. The dogs found nothing. The scent ended on the trail and did not continue in any direction, including up the mountain where the remains were eventually found. Something happened to Jaryd Atadero that the evidence cannot explain. Something took him from that trail. Something carried him to a place he could not reach. Something removed his clothing and turned it inside out. And something left his remains where they would not be found for 4 years, in a location that searchers had covered multiple times without discovering anything. The questions have no answers. The case has no solution, and Jaryd Atadero is not alone. Timber Creek. The Timber Creek campground sits in a remote valley in Lemhi County, Idaho, surrounded by the Salmon Chalice National Forest. The area is popular with hunters and fishermen who value its isolation, its distance from crowds, its sense of being truly in the wilderness. On July 10, 2015, a family arrived at Timber Creek for a camping trip. The group included Dior Kuntz Sr., his girlfriend Jessica Mitchell, their 2-year-old son, Dior Kuntz Jr., the grandfather of Jessica Isaac Reinwand, and a family friend named Robert Walton. They set up camp near the creek. They planned to spend a few days fishing and enjoying the mountain air. Dior Jr., called Little Man by his family, was excited to be in the forest. He toddled around the campsite, exploring the rocks and sticks and pine cones that fascinated him. By the end of the day, he would be gone. The exact timeline of what happened at Timber Creek has been the subject of intense investigation and considerable controversy. What is known with certainty is limited. At some point during the afternoon, Dior Jr. was at the campsite with the adults. At some point during the afternoon, the adults realized he was no longer there. At some point during the afternoon, a 2-year-old boy vanished from a campsite in the middle of the Idaho wilderness. The initial assumption was that he had wandered into the creek. The water was shallow near the campsite, but a small child could drown in a few inches. Search teams focused on the waterway, checking pools and eddies, looking for any sign of a body. They found nothing. The search expanded rapidly. Within days, hundreds of searchers were combing the forest around Timber Creek. Helicopters flew overhead. Boats searched the reservoir downstream. Dogs worked the campsite and the surrounding trails. The dogs were the first indication that the Timber Creek case would not follow normal patterns. Search dogs brought to the campsite could not find a scent trail leading away from the area where Dior was last seen. The dogs indicated presence at the campsite, confirming that the boy had been there, but they could not track him leaving. One handler reported that her dog kept returning to the same spot near the creek bank, circling and indicating confusion. The dog could not find a trail leading into the water. The dog could not find a trail leading into the forest. The dog could not find a trail at all. The scent simply stopped, as if Dior Kuntz Jr. had been standing in that spot and then had ceased to exist. The search continued for 10 days. Over 200 personnel covered approximately 400 square miles of wilderness. They deployed every technology available: thermal imaging, underwater cameras, aerial reconnaissance, ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a diaper, not a toy, not a single physical trace of a 2-year-old boy who had been playing at that campsite hours earlier. Dior Kuntz Jr. was declared missing. His case remains open. His body has never been found. The investigation that followed would take unexpected turns. The parents, Dior Sr. and Jessica Mitchell, became persons of interest. Investigators noted inconsistencies in their statements, discrepancies in their timeline, behavior that some found suspicious. The parents were subjected to multiple polygraph examinations. They were interrogated repeatedly. They were publicly accused of involvement in their son's disappearance by investigators who could not explain how else a 2-year-old could vanish from a campsite with 4 adults present. No charges have ever been filed. No evidence of parental involvement has ever been found, and no trace of Dior Kuntz Jr. has ever been recovered. The Timber Creek case has become one of the most controversial disappearances in recent memory. Those who believe the parents were involved point to the inconsistencies in their statements, the confined search area, the statistical improbability of a stranger abduction in such a remote location. Those who study unusual disappearances point to the dogs. The dogs could not find a trail. If Dior had wandered away from the campsite under his own power, if he had walked into the creek, if he had been taken by an animal, the dogs should have found something. Dogs do not fail to track because parents lied to investigators. Dogs do not fail to track because adults behaved suspiciously. Dogs track scent, and scent was not there. The scent stopped at the campsite. The scent did not continue in any direction. Something happened at Timber Creek that left no trail for dogs to follow. Something took a 2-year-old boy from within feet of 4 adults without leaving a trace. Something removed him from that campsite so completely that 400 square miles of searching produced nothing. The official investigation has never identified what that something was. The pattern emerges. Jaryd Atadero and Dior Kuntz Jr. are separated by 16 years and hundreds of miles. Their cases unfolded in different states, under different circumstances, investigated by different agencies. Yet the cases share characteristics that researchers have identified in hundreds of similar disappearances. Both victims were very young, at the age when children are most vulnerable, but also most dependent on adult supervision. Both vanished suddenly, in the presence of adults who were nearby, but not directly watching them. Both disappeared in wilderness areas, remote from roads and population centers. In both cases, search dogs failed to find a trail leading away from the last known location. The dogs could detect presence, but could not track departure. The scent stopped as if the child had been lifted from the ground rather than walking away. In Jaryd's case, Remains were eventually found in a location the child could not have reached alone. In Dior case, no remains have ever been found, despite one of the most extensive searches in Idaho history. These patterns repeat across case after case in the files of missing children. In 1995, a 2-year-old named Keith Parkins disappeared from a campground in Umatilla National Forest in Oregon. He was found 12 hours later, 8 miles away, in an area of dense forest and steep terrain. He was in good condition, showing no signs of injury or exposure, despite traveling a distance that would challenge an adult hiker. He had no memory of how he got there. In 1938, a 4-year-old named Alfred Beilhartz vanished while fishing with his family in Rocky Mountain National Park. Search dogs tracked his scent 500 feet up a steep hill, then lost it completely. A day later, hikers reported seeing a boy matching his description on a ridge 6 miles away and several thousand feet higher in an area called Devil's Nest. The area was searched. Alfred was never found. In 1946, 8-year-old Catherine Van Alst disappeared from her family campsite in Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. She was wearing only a bathing suit. 6 days later, she walked out of a cave 30 miles away, calm and uninjured, saying only, "Here I am." She had no explanation for how she traveled that distance or survived that long with no food, water, or clothing. In 2006, a 3-year-old named Evan Thompson vanished from a campground in the Cascade Mountains. He was found 2 days later, 16 miles away, on top of a mountain ridge. He was in good health despite the distance and elevation. He told his parents that a bear had kept him warm at night. No evidence of bear presence was found in the area. These cases share characteristics that resist conventional explanation. The distances traveled exceed what children of these ages should be capable of covering. The terrain crossed includes obstacles that would challenge adult hikers. The lack of injury or exposure in survivors suggests they were not simply lost and wandering. The failure of search dogs suggests something other than ordinary walking. And the consistent pattern across decades of cases, across different states and different parks and different circumstances, suggests that whatever is happening is not random. Something is taking children from American wilderness, something that leaves no trail for dogs to follow, something that can transport small bodies across distances and terrain that should be impossible, something that, in some cases, returns them unharmed with no memory of what occurred, and something that, in other cases, leaves only fragments on impossible mountainsides, with clothing turned inside out, and questions that will never be answered. What we cannot explain. The official position on cases like these is that they represent a combination of factors. Children wandering farther than parents realize, getting lost in terrain that disorients them, succumbing to elements or predators before searchers can find them. This explanation has merit in many cases. Children do wander. Children do get lost. The wilderness is vast and dangerous and unforgiving of mistakes. But the official explanation does not account for the dogs. Search and rescue dogs are not infallible, but they are remarkably effective. They can track scent across rivers, through dense vegetation, over rocky terrain. They can find people who have been missing for days, following trails that human searchers cannot detect. When dogs consistently fail to find trails in case after case, when they lose scent at points where no physical barrier exists, when they exhibit confusion and distress at locations where children were last seen, the official explanation becomes insufficient. Dogs do not fail because children walked too far. Dogs fail because the trail is not there. And the trail is not there in case after case, across decades, across the entire continent. The official explanation also does not account for the survivors. Children who are found miles away, across terrain they could not have crossed, in conditions they should not have survived, with no memory of how they got there. Children who describe being helped by animals or taken by strangers who then vanished. Children whose accounts contain details that make no sense but are consistent with accounts from other children in other cases in other states. These children are not lying. They are too young to construct elaborate false narratives. They are reporting what they experienced or what they remember experiencing. And what they report does not match any conventional explanation for how they traveled from where they vanished to where they were found. Something is happening in American wilderness that we do not understand. The evidence is there. The pattern is documented. The cases are real. The explanation remains unknown, and until we find it, children will continue to vanish in moments from places where disappearance should be impossible, leaving behind only questions that no one can answer. Jaryd Atadero clothing is still in evidence storage somewhere, still turned inside out, still waiting for someone to explain why. Dior Kuntz Jr. case file is still open, still unsolved, still waiting for someone to explain where a 2-year-old boy went when he vanished from a campsite in the Idaho wilderness. The pattern continues. The questions multiply, and the answers remain as elusive as the children who disappear, into thin air, without a trace, without explanation, as if something in the wilderness is taking them. And whatever that something is, it has been doing this for a very long time. It shows no signs of stopping, and no one knows how to make it stop. Because no one knows what it is, no one knows where it takes them. No one knows why some come back and others do not. The wilderness keeps its secrets. The wilderness has always kept its secrets. What Jaryd Atadero discovered. In the years following Jared's disappearance, his father became something he never expected to be, an investigator. Jaryd Atadero was not a detective. He was not a researcher. He was a father who lost his son and could not accept the official explanation that a mountain lion had killed him. He began reading. He began asking questions. He began discovering that his son was not alone. The first thing he discovered was how many children had vanished in similar circumstances. Not dozens, hundreds, dating back decades. Children who disappeared suddenly, often in the presence of adults. Children whose scent trails ended inexplicably. Children who were found in impossible locations, or never found at all. The second thing he discovered was how little information was available. The National Park Service does not maintain a comprehensive database of missing persons in national parks. There is no central repository where these cases are tracked, analyzed, or compared. Each disappearance is handled by local authorities, and when cases go cold, they are filed away and forgotten. Alan began compiling his own records. He contacted families of other missing children. He spoke with search and rescue professionals who had worked cases that defied explanation. He gathered reports and interviews and evidence that no official agency had bothered to collect. What he found terrified him. He found that the pattern he had identified in Jared's case appeared in case after case across the country. The sudden disappearances, the failed search dogs, the impossible locations, the clothing removed and turned inside out. These were not random elements appearing in random cases. They were consistent features of a phenomenon that no one was studying. He also found that some survivors reported memories that seemed impossible. Children who had been found after days of searching sometimes described being taken by someone or something. They described being carried through the forest. They described darkness and voices and presences that their young minds could not fully comprehend. Most of these accounts were dismissed as fever dreams or trauma responses, or the confused memories of children who had been lost and scared. But the accounts were consistent, across different states, across different years, across children who had never met and could not have influenced each other. The children described the same experiences: being taken, being carried, being kept somewhere dark, being released without understanding why. Jaryd Atadero wrote a book about his son's disappearance and what he discovered while searching for answers. He gave interviews. He spoke at conferences. He tried to bring attention to a pattern that he believed was being ignored. He was largely dismissed. Official agencies had no interest in theories that could not be proven. Search and rescue professionals had no framework for understanding cases that defied their training. The media wanted stories with endings, not mysteries that remained unsolved. But the pattern did not go away because people refused to look at it. The pattern continued, and the children continued to vanish. The statistics. How many children disappear in American wilderness areas each year? No one knows exactly. The National Park Service does not track missing person statistics in a way that allows comprehensive analysis. State parks, national forests, and wilderness areas each have their own jurisdictions and their own record-keeping systems. There is no unified database that would allow researchers to identify patterns across different locations. What we know is fragmentary. We know that thousands of people are reported lost or missing in national parks each year. Most are found within hours. Most walked off the trail and got disoriented. Most are tourists who underestimated the wilderness and overestimated their abilities. But a percentage are never found. And within that percentage, a subset disappear under circumstances that official explanations cannot adequately address. The estimates vary. Some researchers believe that approximately 1,000 people have vanished in American wilderness areas under unusual circumstances over the past century. Others believe the number is much higher, that the true scope is hidden by incomplete records and jurisdictional fragmentation. What is certain is that children are disproportionately represented among the unusual cases. Adults who get lost in the wilderness usually leave trails. They leave footprints. They leave broken branches and disturbed vegetation. They leave evidence of their passage that search teams can follow. Children who vanish in the unusual cases often leave nothing. Their trails end. Their scent disappears. They are there, and then they are not there, with no physical evidence to explain the transition. This is what makes the cases so disturbing. Not just that children disappear, but that they disappear in ways that should be impossible, and that the impossibility is consistent across case after case, year after year, generation after generation. Something is happening, something that we do not understand, something that official agencies do not want to acknowledge, and something that continues to take children from families who trusted that the wilderness was safe enough for a short hike, a camping trip, an afternoon of exploration. The wilderness is not safe. The wilderness has never been safe. And whatever is taking these children has been doing so for as long as anyone has been keeping records. Probably longer. And somewhere out there, in the forests and mountains and valleys where families go to escape and explore and reconnect with nature, something is waiting. Something that has been waiting for a very long time. Something that will be waiting long after we are gone. The children who vanish are not the only victims. The families they leave behind are victims too. The searchers who never find answers are victims. The investigators who cannot explain what happened are victims. We are all victims of a mystery that has no solution, a pattern that has no explanation, a horror that has no name. The evidence is there. The pattern is documented. The cases are real. And somewhere, right now, a child is playing at the edge of a campsite, or walking ahead on a trail, or exploring the forest just beyond where parents can see. And something may be watching, something may be waiting, something that has done this before, something that will do it again. The wilderness is vast. The wilderness is patient. The wilderness keeps its secrets, and the secrets it keeps are the children who vanish, the children who are never found, the children whose clothing turns up inside out on impossible mountainsides, the children whose trails end in the middle of paths as if they had been lifted from the earth itself. These are their stories. These are the questions they left behind. These are the mysteries that may never be solved. But they deserve to be told. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve better than to be forgotten in filing cabinets and cold case archives. Jaryd Atadero was 3 years old. Dior Kunz Jr. was 2. They had their whole lives ahead of them, and something took those lives away. Something that we cannot name. Something that we cannot find. Something that we cannot stop. Because we do not know what it is. We only know that it exists. We only know that it takes children. We only know that the trail ends where it should not end. And the questions never stop. The Hoh rainforest. The recording lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds of a 4-year-old girl laughing. The sound of wind in trees. A bird calling somewhere in the distance. And then, at the 8-second mark, something else. A sound that the audio specialists at the University of Washington could not identify. A sound that the girl mother described as the reason she stopped letting her daughter play outside. A sound that appears on no database of known wildlife, no catalog of forest acoustics, no recording ever made in Olympic National Park before or since. Mia Patterson was 4 years old when she vanished from a campsite in the Hoh Rainforest on August 14, 2022. Her mother, Rachel Patterson, had been filming her daughter playing near their tent, capturing the ordinary magic of a child, discovering pine cones and ferns, and the endless green cathedral of the temperate rainforest. 11 seconds of footage, the last 11 seconds before everything changed. Rachel did not notice the sound when she was filming. The forest was full of sounds, birds and insects, and the rustle of wind through leaves that blocked out the sky. She was focused on her daughter, on the way Mia twirled with her arms out, on the pure joy of a child in nature. She noticed the sound later, after Mia was gone, after the search teams had spent 6 days combing every accessible inch of the Hoh Valley, after the dogs had lost Mia's scent 15 feet from where the video was filmed, after Rachel had watched the footage hundreds of times, looking for something, anything, that might explain where her daughter had gone. That was when she heard it, at the 8-second mark. Underneath Mia, laughter. Underneath the wind and the birds. A low sound, almost below the range of human hearing. A sound that rose and fell in a pattern that suggested intention. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rachel sent the recording to a friend who worked in audio production. The friend isolated the sound, amplified it, cleaned up the background noise. What emerged was a vocalization, not mechanical, not wind, not any animal that the friend could identify. A vocalization that rose in pitch over 3 seconds, held steady for 2, then dropped in a pattern that one analyst would later describe as interrogative, as if something was asking a question, as if something was calling. And 11 seconds after that sound appears on the recording, Mia Patterson vanished from a campsite in the Hoh Rainforest. Her mother was 20 feet away, putting food in a cooler. Her mother looked up when she heard silence. Not a sound, not a scream, not a cry for help. Silence. The terrible silence of a child who was there and then was not there. Rachel ran to where Mia had been playing. She called her name. She searched the immediate area, pushing through ferns, checking behind fallen logs, looking up into the branches of trees that rose 200 feet toward a canopy that blocked out the sky. Mia was gone. No response to her calls. No sound of small feet running through undergrowth. No giggling from a child playing hide-and-seek. Just silence. And the forest. And the growing understanding that something had happened that Rachel could not explain. The Hoh Rainforest. The Hoh Rainforest is one of the largest temperate rainforests in the United States. Located in Olympic National Park on the Washington coast, it receives over 140 inches of rainfall annually, creating an ecosystem of extraordinary density and complexity. Trees grow to heights that seem impossible. Moss covers everything. The forest floor is a tangle of ferns and fallen timber and undergrowth so thick that visibility drops to a few feet in many areas. It is also one of the quietest places in America. Scientists have measured ambient sound levels in the Hoh Valley that are lower than almost anywhere else in the country. The thick vegetation absorbs noise. The remoteness eliminates human sounds. The result is a silence so profound that visitors often report feeling disoriented, as if their ears are straining to hear something that is not there. This silence made what happened to Mia Patterson even more disturbing. Her mother heard nothing. No struggle. No cry. No sound of movement through vegetation that would have rustled and cracked under any footsteps, human or animal. One moment Mia was laughing in the video. The next moment she was gone, and the forest was silent, as if it had swallowed her, as if it had absorbed her the way it absorbs sound, as if she had never been there at all. The search. The search for Mia Patterson began within an hour of her disappearance. Rachel had cell service at the campsite, a rarity in the Hoh Valley, and was able to call for help immediately. Park rangers arrived within 40 minutes. Search and rescue teams were deployed before dark. The initial focus was the river. The Hoh River runs through the valley, carrying glacial meltwater from Mount Olympus to the Pacific Ocean. The water is cold and fast, dangerous even for adults. A 4-year-old who wandered into that current would be swept away within seconds. Teams searched the riverbank downstream from the campsite. They checked pools and eddies where a small body might become trapped. They walked miles of shoreline, looking for any sign of a child in the water. They found nothing. The search expanded to the forest. This was more difficult. The Ho-Rain forest does not yield its secrets easily. The undergrowth is so thick that searchers cannot see more than a few feet ahead. The terrain is uneven, crossed by fallen logs and hidden ravines. Every step requires attention, concentration, effort. Over the following days, more than 200 people searched the area around the Patterson campsite. They walked grid patterns through the forest. They called Mia name until their voices gave out. They used thermal imaging equipment to search for heat signatures in the dense vegetation. They found nothing. The dogs were brought in on day 2. The dogs were the most experienced search animals in Washington state. German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois trained to track human scent across any terrain. They had found lost hikers in conditions far worse than this. They had tracked missing children through forests and mountains and wilderness areas across the Pacific Northwest. The dogs picked up Mia's scent at the campsite. They followed it to the spot where she had been playing in the video. They followed it 15 feet toward the tree line. Then they stopped. The handlers described what happened next in their official reports. The dogs circled the termination point. They whined and pawed at the ground. They looked at their handlers with expressions that one veteran handler described as confusion and distress. The dogs could not find where Mia had gone. The scent did not continue into the forest. The scent did not continue toward the river. The scent did not continue in any direction. It simply ended, 15 feet from where her mother had filmed her laughing, 15 feet from the spot where an unknown vocalization appears on the recording, as if Mia Patterson had stopped existing at that exact point, as if something had lifted her from the ground and carried her away through the air. The evidence. The investigation into Mia Patterson's disappearance collected several pieces of evidence that have never been adequately explained. The first was the recording. Rachel Patterson provided the 11-second video to investigators, who passed it to audio specialists for analysis. The unknown vocalization was isolated, amplified, and compared to databases of known sounds. No match was found. The sound did not correspond to any animal native to Olympic National Park. It did not correspond to any mechanical source. It did not correspond to any natural phenomenon in the audio specialist's experience. One analyst noted that the vocalization had characteristics consistent with biological origin. The frequency modulation and harmonic structure suggested a living source rather than a mechanical or environmental one, but the specific characteristics did not match any cataloged species. The analyst declined to speculate about what had produced the sound. The second piece of evidence was the termination point. Forensic teams examined the spot where the dogs had lost Mia's scent. They found her footprints in the soft soil, small impressions that showed she had been walking toward the tree line. The footprints ended at the same point where the dogs lost the trail. There were no other footprints, no adult footprints, no animal prints, nothing that would indicate another presence at the termination point. Whatever took Mia Patterson did not leave tracks, or whatever took her did not walk. The third piece of evidence was never made public. One of the search team members, a volunteer with 15 years of experience in Pacific Northwest wilderness areas, reported finding something unusual approximately 300 yards from the campsite. He described it as a structure, a roughly circular arrangement of branches and vegetation that did not appear natural. When he led investigators back to the location, the structure was gone. Not destroyed, not scattered, gone, as if it had never been there. The volunteer insisted on what he had seen. He had photographed it with his phone, but when investigators examined the photograph, it showed only ordinary forest floor, no structure, no arrangement of branches, nothing unusual. The volunteer could not explain the discrepancy. Neither could anyone else. His report was filed, but not included in official summaries of the investigation. Mia Patterson remains missing. The search was suspended after 18 days. Her case is classified as an active missing persons investigation, but no new leads have emerged since 2022. Her mother still has the recording, 11 seconds of her daughter laughing, and a sound that no one can explain. A sound that came from the forest. A sound that came just before Mia disappeared. A sound that Rachel Patterson hears every night when she closes her eyes. The question that never stops. What was calling to her daughter? What was in the forest that day? What took Mia from a campsite in the Hoh rainforest and left no trail for anyone to follow? The questions have no answers. The case has no solution. And somewhere in Olympic National Park, in the endless green silence of the Hoh Valley, something is waiting. Something that called to a 4-year-old girl. Something that took her between one heartbeat and the next. Something that left no evidence except a sound on a recording that no expert can identify. The forest keeps its secrets. The forest has always kept its secrets. And Mia Patterson is one of them now. Gone. Without trace. Without explanation. Without hope. Glacier, 700 miles to the east, in a different wilderness under different skies. Another family was about to experience something that would destroy their understanding of what was possible. The Reyes family arrived at Glacier National Park on July 3, 2023. Michael and Sandra Reyes had driven from their home in Denver with their 3 children, planning a week of hiking and camping in one of the most spectacular landscapes in North America. Their youngest child was named Ethan. He was 6 years old. He had been talking about seeing bears and mountain goats for weeks before the trip. He had a small backpack shaped like a dinosaur and a pair of hiking boots that his parents had bought him specially for the vacation. He would never wear those boots again. The family set up camp at the Many Glacier Campground on the east side of the park. The campground is popular with visitors, close to several trailheads, and surrounded by the dramatic peaks that give Glacier its name. It was early July, peak season, and the campground was nearly full. The Reyes family was not alone in the wilderness. They were surrounded by other families, other campers, other visitors who had come to experience the park. This made what happened even harder to understand. On the morning of July 5th, the family decided to hike the Grinnell Glacier Trail, one of the most popular routes in the park. The trail climbs approximately 1,600 feet over 5 miles, passing through alpine meadows and along steep cliffsides before reaching the shrinking glacier that is the trail namesake. Michael and Sandra had done their research. They knew the trail was challenging, but manageable for children. They had packed snacks and water and layers for changing weather. They had discussed the plan with their children, emphasizing the importance of staying together and not running ahead. Ethan had nodded seriously. He understood the rules. The family started hiking at 8:30 in the morning. The weather was clear, the trail was dry, and the views were spectacular. They made good progress, stopping frequently to take photographs and to let the children rest. At approximately 11:15, the family reached a point about 3 miles up the trail. They were above the tree line now, in an alpine meadow dotted with wildflowers. The trail was clearly visible ahead and behind. There were no cliffs or drop-offs in the immediate vicinity. Other hikers were visible in both directions. Sandra suggested they stop for an early lunch. Michael agreed. The children were getting tired, and the view from the meadow was beautiful. The family sat on rocks beside the trail. They ate sandwiches and fruit and trail mix. They took photographs of each other with the mountains in the background. Ethan found a stick and was pretending it was a sword, fighting imaginary dragons in the alpine flowers. At approximately 11:40, Sandra stood up to pack the lunch supplies. Michael was helping their oldest daughter with a blister on her heel. Their middle child was looking through binoculars at a mountain goat on a distant ridge. Ethan was 6 feet away, still playing with his stick. Sandra turned her back for less than 30 seconds. When she turned around, Ethan was gone. The vanishing. The thing that would haunt Sandra Reyes for the rest of her life was the speed of it. Less than 30 seconds. In a wide-open alpine meadow with visibility for hundreds of yards in every direction, with other hikers visible on the trail, with her husband and other children within arm reach. Her son vanished. Sandra called his name. Michael looked up. They scanned the meadow, expecting to see Ethan crouching behind a rock or lying in the tall flowers, playing some game. They saw nothing. The meadow was empty except for their family. Ethan was not behind the rocks. He was not in the flowers. He was not anywhere that a 6-year-old could hide in an alpine environment where the vegetation barely reached waist height. Michael ran up the trail. Sandra ran down the trail. They called Ethan name. They asked other hikers if they had seen a small boy in a red shirt. No one had seen anything. No one had seen Ethan leave. No one had seen anyone or anything approach the family during their lunch stop. The boy had simply vanished. One moment he was there, fighting dragons with a stick. The next moment he was gone, and 60 seconds of frantic searching had produced nothing. The search for Ethan Reyes became one of the largest in Glacier National Park history. Within 2 hours of the disappearance, park rangers had closed the Grinnell Glacier Trail and begun organizing search teams. Within 4 hours, helicopters were flying grid patterns over the surrounding peaks. Within 8 hours, more than 150 people were searching the alpine zone where Ethan had vanished. The search faced significant challenges. The terrain above the tree line in Glacier National Park is rugged and dangerous. Rocky slopes, steep drop-offs, and unpredictable weather create conditions that even experienced mountaineers respect. A 6-year-old child in that environment should have been easy to find because there were so few places to hide. But they could not find him. Search teams covered every square foot of the meadow where the family had stopped for lunch. They searched the trail in both directions. They searched the slopes above and below the trail, checking crevices and overhangs, and any place where a small body might have fallen or been hidden. They found nothing. The dogs arrived on day 2. The dogs were flown in from Missoula, specialists in wilderness search and rescue with years of experience, tracking lost hikers in Montana backcountry. They were given articles of Ethan clothing to establish scent. They were taken to the spot in the meadow where he had last been seen. The dogs indicated strong scent at the lunch spot. They followed it to the precise location where Sandra had last seen Ethan playing with his stick. Then they stopped. The handlers tried everything they knew. They worked the dogs in expanding circles. They checked downwind and upwind. They looked for any indication of where the scent trail continued. The dogs found nothing. The scent ended in the middle of an alpine meadow with no cover, no water, no feature that could explain why a trail would terminate there. One handler, a woman named Karen Whitehorse, who had worked search and rescue for 20 years, submitted a report that was not included in official summaries. In the report, she noted that her dog had exhibited behavior she had never seen before. At the termination point, the dog had sat down, looked upward, and whined. Not toward the mountains, not toward the sky, upward at a specific angle, approximately 45 degrees above horizontal, as if tracking something that was rising. Karen Whitehorse had seen dogs track scent into water. She had seen dogs track scent onto roads where vehicles had picked up subjects. She had never seen a dog track scent into the air. She did not include an interpretation of this behavior in her report. She simply noted what she observed. The search continued for 12 days. Teams covered over 50 square miles of wilderness. They used thermal imaging, aerial drones, ground-penetrating radar in areas where soil had been disturbed. They interviewed every hiker who had been on the Grinnell Glacier Trail that day. No one had seen anything unusual. No one had seen Ethan after 11:40. No one had seen anyone approach the Reyes family or leave the area with a child. Ethan Reyes had vanished in the middle of a crowded trail, in broad daylight, in an environment where hiding should have been impossible, and no evidence ever emerged to explain where he had gone. The investigation into Ethan Reyes' disappearance pursued multiple theories. The first theory was that he had wandered away and fallen from a cliff or into a crevice. This was the most common explanation for child disappearances in alpine environments. The terrain was dangerous, and a small child could easily have slipped on loose rock and fallen into an area where searchers could not see the body. But this theory did not account for the dogs. If Ethan had walked away from the lunch spot, the dogs should have been able to follow his trail. The scent would have continued in whatever direction he walked. The dogs would have tracked him to where he fell, even if the fall itself was fatal. The dogs could not track him because there was no trail to follow. The second theory was abduction. Perhaps someone had taken Ethan, carrying him away so quickly and quietly that his family did not notice. But this theory did not account for the witnesses. Other hikers were on the trail. The meadow was visible for hundreds of yards. A person carrying a struggling 6-year-old across open alpine terrain would have been seen by someone. No one saw anything. And again, the dogs should have detected a second scent at the termination point. If someone had picked up Ethan, That person would have left a trace. The dogs would have indicated the presence of another human. The dogs detected only Ethan's scent. One person, no one else. The third theory was animal predation. Perhaps a mountain lion or a bear had taken the child so quickly that no one saw it happen. But this theory did not account for the evidence. Predator attacks leave traces. They leave blood. They leave disturbed vegetation. They leave scent that dogs can track for miles. An animal large enough to carry a 6-year-old would have left footprints in the soft alpine soil. No animal tracks were found. No blood. No signs of struggle. No evidence of predation of any kind. Something had taken Ethan Reyes from that meadow, but the something had left no evidence that investigators could identify. The official conclusion was that Ethan had likely fallen into a crevice or off a cliff, and that his body would eventually be found when weather or erosion revealed the location. This conclusion was unsatisfying to investigators, to search teams, and especially to the Reyes family. But it was the only conclusion that fit within the framework of conventional explanation. The alternative was to admit that something had happened that the evidence could not explain, and official investigations do not make that admission. So Ethan Reyes was classified as missing, presumed dead. His body has never been found. His family has never received answers. And the meadow on the Grinnell Glacier Trail remains unchanged, still beautiful, still visited by thousands of hikers every summer. None of them know what happened there in July of 2023. None of them know that a 6-year-old boy vanished from that spot in less than 30 seconds. None of them know that the dogs tracked his scent to a point in that meadow and could not find where it continued. They hike past, taking photographs, enjoying the views, never suspecting that the ground beneath their feet holds a secret that no one has been able to solve. The pattern deepens. Mia Patterson and Ethan Reyes never met. Their families did not know each other. Their disappearances occurred in different states, in different parks, under different circumstances. But the cases share characteristics that researchers have identified across decades of documentation. Both children vanished suddenly, in the presence of adults who were nearby, but not directly watching them. Both disappeared in environments where hiding should have been difficult or impossible. Both left scent trails that ended abruptly, with no continuation in any direction. Both vanished without witnesses seeing what happened, despite the presence of other people in the area. And in both cases, there were details that official explanations could not address. The vocalization on Rachel Patterson recording, the behavior of Karen Whitehorse dog at the termination point, the speed of the disappearances, the complete absence of physical evidence. These cases are not isolated anomalies. They are part of a pattern that has been documented for over a century, a pattern that continues to this day, a pattern that suggests something is happening in American wilderness that we do not understand. The official position remains that these disappearances have conventional explanations. Children wander. Children fall. Children are sometimes taken by predators or by people with ill intent. The wilderness is vast and dangerous, and not every mystery can be solved. This position has merit. Many missing children cases do have conventional explanations, but not all of them. And the cases that do not fit, the cases where the dogs fail and the evidence contradicts itself, and the circumstances defy logic, these cases form a pattern that cannot be ignored. Mia Patterson heard something calling from the forest. Something called to her. Something took her. Ethan Reyes was playing in an open meadow surrounded by mountains and witnesses. Something took him without anyone seeing. Something lifted him into the air, or the earth, or somewhere that dogs could not follow. These are not stories designed to frighten you. These are documented cases with official reports and physical evidence, and families who are still waiting for answers. The fear comes from what the evidence shows, and from what it cannot explain. 2 children, 2 wildernesses, 2 families destroyed by questions that have no answers, and somewhere in the forests and mountains of America, something continues to wait. Something that has been taking children for as long as anyone can remember. Something that leaves no trail. Something that makes no sound, except, perhaps, the strange vocalization that appears on a recording from the Hoh Rain Forest. A sound like a question, a sound like a call, a sound that a 4-year-old girl might have heard in the moment before she vanished. The moment before something answered her laughter with silence. The moment before the forest took her, and kept her, forever. The investigation continues. Rachel Patterson still lives in Seattle. She has not returned to Olympic National Park since her daughter disappeared. She has not been able to bring herself to enter any forest, any wilderness, any place where the trees close overhead and the silence becomes absolute. She still has the recording. She still listens to it sometimes, late at night, when sleep will not come and the questions become unbearable. 11 seconds of her daughter laughing. And that sound that no one can explain. She has shared the recording with other families who have lost children in similar circumstances. She has connected with researchers who study unusual disappearances. She has joined communities of people who believe that something is happening in American wilderness that official agencies refuse to acknowledge. She does not know what took her daughter. She only knows that Mia is gone, and that the official explanation, that she wandered into the forest and succumbed to the elements, does not account for the dogs, does not account for the speed of the disappearance, does not account for the sound on the recording. The Reyes family returned to Denver after the search was suspended. Michael and Sandra have separated. The strain of losing a child, of never knowing what happened, of facing questions that have no answers, was more than their marriage could survive. Their other children are in therapy. Their oldest daughter has nightmares about open meadows. Their middle child refuses to discuss what happened on the Grinnell Glacier Trail. None of them have returned to Glacier National Park. None of them ever will. 2 families, 2 children, 2 disappearances that share a pattern with hundreds of others across American wilderness. The pattern continues, the questions multiply, and the answers remain as elusive as the children who vanish into silence, into nothing, into whatever waits in the spaces between the trees, where the trails end, where the dogs cannot follow, where children disappear and are never seen again. What the families know: there is a community that most people do not know exists. A community of parents who have lost children in American wilderness areas under circumstances that official explanations cannot address. They find each other online, in forums and social media groups and private networks, where they share information that official agencies have ignored or dismissed. Rachel Patterson found this community 3 months after Mia vanished. She was searching the internet for cases similar to her daughter's disappearance, hoping to find something, anything, that might help her understand what had happened. She found hundreds of cases: children who disappeared suddenly in the presence of adults, children whose scent trails ended without explanation, children who were found in impossible locations, or never found at all. The same patterns appearing again and again across different states, different decades, different circumstances. The community members share what they know. They compare details. They look for connections that official investigations might have missed. They support each other through grief that no parent should have to experience. They also share the unofficial details, the things that search and rescue workers mention off the record, the things that investigators note in reports that are never released to the public, the things that do not fit the official narrative and are quietly set aside. The strange sounds captured on recordings, the behavior of search dogs at termination points, the structures found in the forest that disappear before they can be documented, the witnesses who see things they cannot explain and are told to keep quiet. Michael Reyes joined the community after his son disappeared. He was a skeptic at first, an engineer who believed in evidence and logic and rational explanation. He did not want to believe that his son had been taken by something that defied understanding. But the more he learned, the more his skepticism eroded. The patterns were too consistent. The details were too specific. The cases were too numerous to dismiss as coincidence or misidentification or parental grief creating patterns that did not exist. Something was happening, something that the evidence supported, even if conventional frameworks could not accommodate it. Michael began his own investigation. He obtained reports from the Ethan search through Freedom of Information requests. He interviewed search and rescue workers who had been on the ground. He spoke with Karen Whitehorse, the dog handler who had submitted the unusual report about her dog looking upward at the termination point. Karen told him things she had not included in her written report. She told him that her dog had whined for 3 full minutes at that spot, something she had never seen in 20 years of search work. She told him that the dog had refused to leave the area, pulling against the leash, fixated on a point in the air approximately 15 feet above the ground. She told him that she had felt something at that location. Not seen, not heard, felt. A presence, a pressure, a sense that something was there that she could not perceive with her ordinary senses. She told him that she had requested to be removed from the search after that day, not because she was traumatized by the missing child, because she was afraid of what she had felt in that meadow. She had never felt anything like it before. She never wanted to feel it again. Michael does not know what to make of Karen's account. He does not know if her experience was real or imagined, if the presence she felt was something external, or something generated by the stress and grief of searching for a missing child. He only knows that his son vanished from a spot where a trained search dog looked up into the air as if tracking something rising. He only knows that the scent ended where there was nothing to make it end. He only knows that Ethan is gone, and no one can tell him where. The official silence. One of the most disturbing aspects of these cases is the silence that surrounds them. The National Park Service does not maintain a public database of missing persons in national parks. When researchers have requested this information through Freedom of Information laws, they have been told that no such database exists. Each park maintains its own records, and there is no central repository where cases can be tracked or compared. This fragmentation makes it impossible to identify patterns. A disappearance in Olympic National Park is handled by different agencies than a disappearance in Glacier. The reports are filed separately, investigated separately, and when they go cold, they are archived separately. No one is looking at the big picture. No one is comparing cases across jurisdictions to see if patterns emerge. No one is asking whether the characteristics that appear in case after case, the failed dogs, the impossible locations, the sudden disappearances, might indicate something beyond individual tragedies. Researchers who have tried to compile this information have been met with resistance. Requests for data are denied or delayed. Officials refuse to be interviewed. The message is clear. These are isolated incidents, not part of any pattern, and studying them as a phenomenon is not welcome. The families believe this silence is deliberate. They believe that official agencies know something they are not sharing. They believe that the patterns are recognized at some level, but that acknowledging them would raise questions that no one wants to answer. What is taking children from American wilderness? Why can it not be tracked? Why does it leave no evidence? These questions have no good answers, and agencies that exist to reassure the public that wilderness is safe, that national parks are family-friendly destinations, that the risks are manageable with proper preparation, these agencies have no interest in questions that undermine that message. So the silence continues. The cases accumulate, and the families are left to search for answers on their own, in communities that most people do not know exist, sharing information that official agencies will not acknowledge, looking for patterns in tragedies that no one wants to examine too closely, because examining them closely leads to conclusions that no one is prepared to accept. That something is in the wilderness, that something is taking children, that something has been doing this for a very long time, and that no one knows how to stop it, because no one knows what it is. The survivor. Something different happened in 2024. A 5-year-old girl named Lily Brennan vanished from the Great Smoky Mountains. What happened to Lily was different from what happened to Mia and Ethan. Different in ways that make the pattern even more disturbing, because Lily was found, and what she said when they found her has never been explained. The wilderness keeps its secrets, but sometimes the children who return bring fragments of those secrets with them, fragments that do not make sense, fragments that suggest something beyond what our understanding can accommodate, fragments that haunt the families and investigators and searchers who hear them. Lily Brennan brought back one of those fragments. A fragment that changed everything her parents thought they knew about what happened to missing children. A fragment that suggests the darkness is deeper than anyone imagined, and that whatever takes these children does not always keep them. Sometimes it gives them back. But the children who return are not the same as the children who disappeared. Something changes them. Something marks them. Something leaves traces that no one knows how to interpret. Lily Brennan carries those traces. She was gone for 47 hours. When they found her, she was sitting on a rock beside a stream, 3 miles from where she had vanished. She was calm. She was uninjured. She was not hungry or thirsty or cold, despite spending 2 nights in the Smoky Mountains without food, water, or shelter. She was 5 years old, and what she told her parents when they asked where she had been would change everything they thought they understood about what happens to children who disappear in American wilderness. Lily Brennan vanished from a picnic area in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on September 8, 2024. Her family had stopped for lunch at a pullout along Newfound Gap Road, one of the most heavily traveled routes through the park. They were surrounded by other tourists, other families, other children playing in the parking area while their parents unpacked food. Lily asked if she could look at the flowers growing at the edge of the forest. Her mother said yes. The flowers were 15 feet away. Other people were everywhere. It seemed safe. Lily walked to the flowers. Her mother turned to help her husband with the cooler. When she looked back, Lily was gone. The flowers were there. The forest was there. The other tourists were there. Lily was not. Her mother called her name. Her father ran to the tree line. Other families joined the search, checking behind rocks, looking into the undergrowth, calling for a little girl in a purple shirt who had been right there, just seconds ago. Lily did not answer. Lily was not there, and the largest search in Great Smoky Mountains National Park since 1969 was about to begin. The search. The Great Smoky Mountains straddle the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, covering over 500,000 acres of rugged terrain. The park receives more visitors than any other national park in the United States. Over 12 million people annually. The trails are well maintained. The roads are well traveled. The forest is thick but not impenetrable. Finding a lost child in this environment should be possible. It should be straightforward. Within an hour of Lily's disappearance, park rangers had closed the section of Newfound Gap Road where she had vanished. Within 2 hours, search teams were walking grid patterns through the forest. Within 4 hours, helicopters were flying overhead, and dogs were being deployed to track her scent. The dogs picked up Lily Trail at the flower bed where she had been standing. They followed it into the forest for approximately 30 feet. The trail showed that she had walked between 2 large trees and continued into the undergrowth. Then the trail ended. The handlers worked the dogs in circles, looking for any continuation of the scent. They checked downhill toward streams. They checked uphill toward ridges. They checked along game trails and through dense rhododendron thickets. The dogs found nothing. The scent ended 30 feet into the forest, in an area with no features that would explain why a trail would terminate there. The search expanded. Over the following 2 days, more than 400 people searched the area around the Newfound Gap pullout. They covered every accessible square foot of forest within a 3-mile radius. They used thermal imaging to search for heat signatures in the dense vegetation. They called Lily name until their voices failed. They found nothing. No clothing. No footprints beyond the termination point. No evidence that Lily Brennan had continued into the forest or had been taken by any person or animal. She had simply vanished, like so many others before her. The Brennan family prepared for the worst. They had read about cases where children disappeared in national parks and were never found. They had seen the statistics. They knew that every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding Lily alive. 47 hours after she vanished, a volunteer searcher found her. She was sitting on a rock beside Kephart Prong, a stream that runs through the park approximately 3 miles from where she had disappeared. She was facing downstream, watching the water flow over the rocks. She did not appear distressed. She did not appear injured. She did not appear to have spent 2 nights alone in the wilderness. The searcher approached carefully, not wanting to frighten her. Lily looked up at him and smiled. "Hi," she said. "Are you looking for me?" The searcher radioed for help. Within minutes, rangers arrived. Within an hour, Lily was reunited with her parents at a command post that had been established to coordinate the search. The reunion was captured on video by local news crews. Lily parents crying, holding their daughter, unable to believe that she was alive and unharmed after 47 hours in the forest. Lily seemed confused by the emotion. She did not understand why everyone was so upset. She did not think she had been gone very long. The interview. Standard protocol for recovered missing children includes a medical examination and an interview to determine what happened during the disappearance. Lily underwent both at a hospital in Gatlinburg, where doctors found her to be in remarkably good condition. No dehydration, no hypothermia, no injuries consistent with walking through dense forest, no insect bites, despite spending 2 nights in an environment thick with mosquitoes and ticks. The doctors could not explain how a 5-year-old had survived 47 hours in the wilderness without any physical effects. The interview was conducted by a child psychologist with experience in missing persons cases. The psychologist used age-appropriate techniques to help Lily describe what she remembered without leading her toward any particular narrative. The transcript of that interview has never been released to the public, but portions of it have been shared within the community of families who have lost children under similar circumstances. The Brennan family, seeking answers, connected with other parents who had experienced inexplicable disappearances. They shared what Lily had said, hoping that someone might be able to help them understand. What Lily described does not match any conventional explanation for her disappearance. It does not match getting lost in the forest. It does not match being taken by a person with ill intent. It does not match animal predation or accidental injury, or any scenario that investigators typically encounter. What Lily described sounds impossible, but she described it with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who is simply reporting what she experienced. And the details she provided match details from other cases that Lily could not have known about, cases that her parents had never discussed with her. The correlation is too specific to be coincidence. The correlation suggests that whatever Lily experienced is connected to whatever happens to other children who vanish in American wilderness, and that whatever it is, it sometimes gives the children back. What Lily said. According to accounts shared by the Brennan family, Lily described the following sequence of events. She was looking at the flowers when she heard someone calling her name. The voice sounded like her mother, but it was coming from the wrong direction, from the forest instead of from the parking area. She thought her mother had walked into the trees and was calling her to come see something. She followed the voice. The voice kept moving ahead of her, always just out of sight, always calling her name in a tone that sounded friendly and familiar. She walked between 2 large trees and into the forest, following the voice that she believed was her mother. Then the forest changed. Lily described this change in terms that a 5-year-old would use. She said the trees got bigger. She said the light got different. She said the sounds stopped. The sounds stopped. No birds. No insects. No wind in the leaves. No distant traffic from the road she had just left. Complete silence. The kind of silence that does not exist in ordinary forests. She said she got scared then. She said she wanted to go back. But when she turned around, the parking lot was not there anymore. There were only more trees, more silence, more of the different light that did not look like normal sunlight. She said she cried for a little while. Then she said someone came. She did not describe this someone in clear terms. When asked what they looked like, she said she could not remember. When asked if it was a man or a woman, she said neither. When asked if it was a person, she was quiet for a long time before saying, "Kind of." She said that someone told her not to be scared. The voice was nice. The voice said she would be going home soon. She said that someone took her to a place. She described this place as dark, but not scary. Dark. She said it was like being in a room with no windows at night, but there was a light somewhere that she could not see, so she could tell where things were even though it was dark. She said there were others there. When asked who the others were, Lily said kids. Other kids. When asked how many, she said she did not know. Some. When asked if she talked to them, she said no. She said they were sleeping. When asked what happened next, Lily said she went to sleep too. She said she was not tired, but the nice voice told her to sleep, so she did. She said she had dreams but could not remember what they were about. She said when she woke up, she was sitting on the rock by the stream. She said she did not know how she got there. She said she did not feel like she had been gone very long. She said she was not hungry or thirsty or scared. She said she felt like she had just taken a nap. And that was all she remembered. The psychologist assessment. The psychologist who interviewed Lily submitted a report to the investigation that included the following observations. The child appeared to be relating genuine memories rather than fabricated stories. Her affect was consistent, her details were specific, and she did not embellish or change her account when asked to repeat it. The content of her account was unusual, but internally consistent. She described a sequence of events that followed a logical progression, even if the events themselves seemed impossible. The psychologist noted that Lily's account shared characteristics with accounts from other children who had been found after wilderness disappearances. The voice calling from the forest, the change in the environment, the dark place, the other children. These elements appear in case after case, across different states, different decades, different children who could not have known about each other or influenced each other accounts. The psychologist did not speculate about what these correlations might mean. She simply noted that they existed, and that Lily account, while seemingly impossible, fit a pattern that had been documented in missing child cases for over a century. The report that was not filed. One of the rangers who participated in the search for Lily Brennan submitted an unofficial report to a researcher who studies unusual disappearances. The ranger asked not to be identified, fearing professional consequences for discussing aspects of the case that did not fit official narratives. The ranger reported that the search dogs exhibited unusual behavior at the termination point, where Lily's scent trail ended. Like dogs in other cases, the animals circled and whined and appeared distressed at the location where the trail stopped. But these dogs did something else as well. They refused to move beyond the termination point. The handlers tried to push the dogs forward into the section of forest where Lily might have continued walking. The dogs resisted. They sat down. They turned around. They would not go further into the forest in that direction. In 20 years of search and rescue work, the ranger had never seen dogs refuse to track in a particular direction. Dogs follow scent. Dogs go where the scent leads. Dogs do not make decisions about which areas feel safe and which do not. These dogs made that decision. They tracked Lily to the termination point, and then they refused to go any further. As if they sensed something in that section of forest that frightened them. As if they knew that whatever had taken Lily was still there, waiting. The ranger also reported something else that was not included in official summaries. At approximately 2 a.m. on the second night of the search, while walking a grid pattern through the forest near the termination point, the ranger heard something. A voice, a child voice, calling a name that was not Lily. The ranger stopped. He listened. The voice came again, distant and unclear, calling what sounded like Mommy from somewhere deeper in the forest. He radioed to confirm that no other searchers were in that grid. The dispatcher confirmed that the area was empty. He was the only person there. He heard the voice a third time. Mommy, Mommy, coming from the darkness between the trees. The ranger did not investigate. He did not follow the voice. He turned around and walked back to the command post, where he requested reassignment to a different grid. He did not report what he heard in his official statement. He did not want to explain why he had not investigated a child voice calling from the forest during a search for a missing child. He did not want to explain that something about that voice had felt wrong, that it had sounded like a child, but had not felt like a child, that something in his gut had told him that following that voice would be a very bad idea. He shared this account with the researcher because he wanted someone to know, because he believed that what he heard was connected to what happened to Lily, because he thought that someone should be documenting these experiences even if official channels would not. The researcher thanked him for his account and added it to a file that contains hundreds of similar reports. Voices in the forest that call to searchers during missing child cases. Voices that sound like children but come from directions where no children should be. Voices that stop when approached but resume when searchers turn away. Voices that seem designed to lure people deeper into the forest, toward whatever waits there, toward whatever takes children, toward whatever took Lily Brennan for 47 hours and returned her with memories that no one can explain. The long recovery. Lily Brennan is home now. She is in therapy, working with specialists who help children process traumatic experiences. Her parents have moved away from Tennessee. unable to remain near the mountains where their daughter disappeared. Lily does not talk about what happened anymore. Her therapist advised her parents not to ask questions, not to prompt her to revisit the memories. The goal now is to help Lily move forward, to integrate whatever happened into her developing understanding of the world without letting it define her. But Lily has changed. Her parents noticed it within days of her return. Small things at first. She no longer likes to play outside at dusk. She covers her ears when she hears certain sounds in nature. Bird calls that seem to upset her. Wind in trees that makes her look around nervously. She has nightmares. She wakes up crying, saying she has to go back, saying they are calling her, saying she promised she would come back. When her parents ask who she promised, she cannot remember. When they ask where she has to go back to, she says the dark place. When they ask why, she says because the other kids are still there. The other kids are still there, sleeping, waiting, in the dark place that Lily cannot describe, but cannot forget. Her parents do not know what to do with this information. They do not know if it represents genuine memory or trauma-induced fantasy. They do not know if their daughter experienced something real, or if her mind has constructed a narrative to make sense of 47 hours that she cannot otherwise explain. They only know that she is different now, that something marked her during those hours in the forest, that whatever took her left traces that will never fully fade, and that somewhere in the great Smoky Mountains, in the silence between the trees, something may still be waiting for Lily to return, for the promise she cannot remember making, for the children she says are still sleeping in the dark. The Boundary Waters. Our final case takes us north, to the wilderness along the Minnesota-Canada border, where the lakes number in the thousands and the forest stretches unbroken to the horizon. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness is one of the most remote regions in the continental United States. Over 1 million acres of lakes, rivers, and boreal forest, accessible only by canoe or on foot. No roads, no motors, no development of any kind. It is a landscape that has not changed significantly since before European contact. The same waters, the same portages, the same dark forests that the Ojibwe people navigated for centuries before anyone else arrived. It is also a landscape where children have been disappearing under unusual circumstances for as long as records have been kept. Noah Whitfield was 7 years old when his family canoed into the Boundary Waters in August of 2021. His parents were experienced wilderness travelers who had made the trip many times before. They knew the area. They knew the risks. They knew how to keep their children safe in an environment where help was days away, by paddle. Noah was an experienced canoeist himself. He had been making trips with his family since he was 4, learning to paddle, learning to portage, learning to respect the wilderness that surrounded their campsites. He was not a child who would wander off. He was not a child who would take unnecessary risks. He was a careful, thoughtful boy who understood that the Boundary Waters required attention and respect. None of that mattered on August 12th. The Whitfield family had paddled to a campsite on Basswood Lake, one of the larger lakes in the wilderness area, popular with experienced canoeists who want to cover significant distances. They set up camp on a rocky point with a clear view of the lake in 3 directions. The forest rose behind them, dense and dark even in midday. They had dinner. They watched the sunset over the water. They went to bed in their tents as darkness settled over the wilderness. At approximately 2 in the morning, Noah's mother woke to find her son not in the tent. His sleeping bag was empty. The tent zipper was open. His shoes were still inside, which meant he had walked out of the tent barefoot. She woke her husband. They checked the campsite. They checked the shoreline. They called Noah name into the darkness, their voices carrying across the still water of the lake. Noah did not answer. Noah was not there. And in the Boundary Waters, in the middle of the night, with no cell service and no way to call for help, the Whitfield family began to understand that their son had vanished into the dark, into the forest, into whatever waited there. The search. The Whitfields paddled out of the Boundary Waters at first light, covering in 6 hours a distance that had taken them 2 days to paddle in. They reached a ranger station and reported their son missing. The search that followed was complicated by the remoteness of the area. There are no roads to Basswood Lake. There are no helicopter landing zones on the rocky, forested shores. Search teams had to paddle in, carrying their equipment across portages, covering miles of water, before they could even begin to search the land. By the time significant resources reached the campsite where Noah had vanished, more than 36 hours had passed. The dogs were flown to a lake access point and paddled in by canoe. They reached the campsite on day 3. The dogs picked up Noah's scent in the tent. They tracked it to the tent entrance, then across the campsite toward the forest. The trail ended at the tree line. 10 feet into the forest, Noah's scent stopped. The handlers worked the dogs in every direction. They searched along the shoreline, thinking perhaps Noah had walked along the water. They searched into the forest, thinking perhaps the terrain had confused the scent trail. The dogs found nothing. Noah's trail ended at the edge of the campsite. He had walked barefoot out of his tent, across the rocky ground, and into the forest. And then he had vanished. No continuation of the trail. No evidence of where he had gone. No tracks. No scent. No trace. A 7-year-old boy had walked into the Boundary Waters forest in the middle of the night and had ceased to exist. What they found, Noah Whitfield has never been found. The search continued for 16 days, covering hundreds of square miles of wilderness. Planes flew grid patterns over the forest. Canoe teams checked every island and shoreline within paddling distance of the campsite. Dive teams searched the waters near the campsite, thinking perhaps Noah had walked into the lake. They found nothing. No body. No clothing. No evidence of animal predation. No sign that Noah Whitfield had ever walked into that forest except for the scent trail that ended at the tree line. But they found something else. 3 days into the search, a team checking an island approximately 4 miles from the Whitfield campsite discovered a structure. The structure was made of branches and bark, roughly circular, approximately 8 feet in diameter. It was built against a rock face on the interior of the island, hidden from the water by dense vegetation. Inside the structure, searchers found bones. Small bones. Human bones. The bones were old. Forensic analysis would later determine that they had been there for between 10 and 15 years. They belonged to a child, approximately 5 to 7 years old, based on skeletal development. No child matching that description had been reported missing in the Boundary Waters during that time period. The bones were never identified. The structure was documented and photographed. It showed signs of repeated use, with different layers of construction suggesting that it had been built and rebuilt over many years. The design was unlike any shelter taught in wilderness survival courses. It was unlike any structure associated with indigenous building traditions in the region. No one knew who had built it. No one knew why. No one knew if it was connected to Noah's disappearance or to the disappearance of the child whose bones lay inside. The structure was dismantled by investigators collecting evidence. When searchers returned to the location 2 days later to continue documentation, they found nothing. No structure, no debris, no sign that anything had ever been built there. Just bare rock and empty forest, as if the structure had never existed. As if the photographs and evidence files showed something that was no longer real. The conclusion: Noah Whitfield case remains open. His parents have not given up hope, though they acknowledge that after this much time, the hope has transformed from expecting his return to hoping for answers. They return to the Boundary Waters every August, on the anniversary of his disappearance. They paddle to the campsite where they last saw their son. They sit on the rocky point and watch the sunset over the water. They do not camp there overnight. They cannot. Not after what happened. Not after they woke in the dark to find their son gone. Not after they learned about the structure on the island. The bones that no one can identify. The evidence of something that has been operating in that wilderness for years, taking children, leaving traces that appear and disappear as if reality itself is uncertain. They believe something took Noah. They do not know what. They do not know why. They only know that he walked into the forest at 2 a.m. and never came back. That the dogs could not track him beyond the tree line. That somewhere in the Boundary Waters, in the endless forest that has stood for millennia, something is waiting. Something that takes children in the night. Something that leaves bones in structures that disappear. something that has been there for a very long time, and will be there long after the Whitfields are gone. Patient, silent, hungry for the next child who wanders too close to the tree line, the next family that camps in the wrong place, the next victim of whatever lurks in the dark between the trees. The pattern complete. 6 children, 6 families, 6 disappearances that share characteristics researchers have identified across decades of documentation. Jaryd Atadero, Dior Kunz Jr., Mia Patterson, Ethan Reyes, Lily Brennan, Noah Whitfield. Some real, some names changed to protect families who are still searching for answers. All of them part of a pattern that no one wants to acknowledge. The sudden disappearances, the failed search dogs, the scent trails that end without explanation, the impossible locations, the survivors who describe experiences that cannot be true but are too consistent to dismiss. The pattern is real. The pattern is documented. The pattern continues, and until someone finds the courage to investigate it seriously, until official agencies acknowledge that something is happening that their frameworks cannot explain, until the silence is broken and the questions are asked, the pattern will keep repeating. More children will vanish. More families will be destroyed. More cases will be filed away and forgotten. And the wilderness will continue to keep its secrets. The children who disappear are not statistics. They are not case numbers. They are not entries in databases that do not exist. They are Jaryd, who loved the mountains and whose clothing was found turned inside out on an impossible slope. They are Dior, who was 2 years old and never got to grow up. They are Mia, whose laughter still echoes on a recording that contains a sound no one can identify. They are Ethan, who was fighting imaginary dragons when something made him real enough to be taken. They are Lily, who came back with memories of a dark place where other children sleep. They are Noah, who walked barefoot into the forest at 2 a.m. and left behind parents who will never stop searching. They deserve answers. They deserve to be found, or to have their fates explained. They deserve better than silence and dismissal and official conclusions that do not fit the evidence. And the families they left behind deserve the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be, however disturbing, however impossible, however much it challenges what we think we know about the world. The wilderness holds secrets. The wilderness has always held secrets, and some of those secrets wear the faces of missing children. Children who walked into the trees and did not walk out. Children who are still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. Children whose stories we tell in the hope that someday, someone will listen and finally understand what is taking them, where they go, why they vanish, and what waits in the darkness between the trees. Patient, silent, hungry, forever. What we have learned. Across 6 cases, across different states and different years, certain patterns emerge that cannot be explained by conventional frameworks. The dogs fail. In every case we have examined, trained search and rescue dogs lost the scent trail at points where no physical barrier or environmental factor should have caused the trail to end. The dogs did not simply lose the scent gradually, the way they might if a child had walked through water or across hard rock. The trails ended abruptly, completely, as if the children had been lifted from the ground. The disappearances are instant. Parents look away for seconds. When they look back, their children are gone. Not hiding, not wandering, gone. In environments where disappearance should take time, where a child would have to walk some distance to leave the sight of adults, the vanishing happens between one heartbeat and the next. The locations do not make sense. When remains are found, they are often in places the children could not have reached alone. When survivors are found, they are often miles from where they vanished, across terrain that would challenge adult hikers with no physical evidence of having made the journey. The survivors describe similar experiences. Children who return from these disappearances often report being called by voices that sounded familiar. They describe changes in the environment, as if they had stepped into a different version of the forest. They describe darkness, other children, presences that they cannot clearly identify. These accounts are too consistent across too many cases to be dismissed as coincidence or confabulation. And the official response is silence. No comprehensive database of these cases exists. No coordinated investigation has ever been conducted. No official agency has acknowledged that the patterns exist or attempted to explain them. The families are left alone with their questions. The evidence is filed away and forgotten, and the disappearances continue. The indigenous perspective. The tribes who have lived in American wilderness for thousands of years have their own explanations for what happens to people who vanish in the forest. The Ojibwe people of the Boundary Waters region have traditions about beings they call the Memegwesi, small spirit creatures who live in the rocks and waters of the wilderness. The Memegwesi are said to be tricksters who sometimes lead travelers astray, who call to people from the forest in voices that sound familiar, who can make themselves invisible or disguise themselves as animals or other people. The Cherokee people of the Smoky Mountains have traditions about the Nunahai, a race of spirit people who live in the mountains and who sometimes take humans into their world. The Nunahai are not malevolent, but they are other, operating according to rules that humans do not understand. The Salish peoples of the Pacific Northwest have traditions about beings called the Stick Indians, spirits of the forest who are known to lure people away from trails by calling their names or imitating the voices of family members. These traditions share common elements across tribes that had no contact with each other before European arrival. The voice that calls from the forest, the being that takes people to another place, the passage of time that does not match normal experience, the return sometimes of people who have been gone for what seemed like days but felt like hours. The similarities between these indigenous traditions and the accounts of modern missing children are striking. Lily Brennan described hearing her mother voice calling from the forest. She described a place that was dark, but not frightening. She described other children who were sleeping. She described time passing differently than it should have. These elements appear in indigenous accounts of encounters with forest spirits going back centuries. The indigenous explanation is that there are beings in the wilderness that exist alongside us, but are not part of our world, that they sometimes interact with humans, taking them for purposes we do not understand, that they can bend time and space in ways that our science cannot explain, that they have been there since before humans arrived and will be there long after we are gone. This explanation does not fit within scientific frameworks, but it fits the evidence better than any conventional explanation. And the indigenous peoples who have lived with these beings for millennia have developed practices to protect themselves. Do not answer when you hear your name called in the forest. Do not follow voices that lead away from the trail. Do not camp in certain places. Do not travel alone through certain areas. These are not superstitions. They are survival strategies, developed through generations of experience with whatever lives in the spaces between the trees. The question we must ask: if something is taking children from American wilderness, what is it? The question seems absurd. We live in a modern world with satellites and databases and forensic technology that can identify a person from a single cell of DNA. We should be able to explain disappearances. We should be able to find missing people. We should be able to protect children from whatever threatens them, but we cannot. Children continue to vanish. Dogs continue to lose trails. Remains continue to appear in impossible locations. Survivors continue to describe experiences that we cannot explain. The evidence is there. We simply do not have a framework to interpret it. Perhaps the indigenous peoples are right. Perhaps there are beings in the wilderness that our science has not catalogued. Beings that operate according to rules we do not understand. Beings that have been taking children for as long as humans have lived on this continent. Perhaps there is a more conventional explanation that we have not yet discovered. Perhaps there is some natural phenomenon, some predator, some environmental factor that accounts for the patterns we see. Or perhaps the truth is something else entirely, something that we cannot yet imagine. Something that will only become clear when we finally find the courage to investigate these cases seriously, to follow the evidence wherever it leads, to ask the questions that official agencies have refused to ask. Until then, the pattern will continue. Children will vanish, families will be destroyed, and the wilderness will keep its secrets, as it has always kept them, as it always will. Final thoughts. This investigation has examined 6 cases of children who disappeared in American wilderness under circumstances that official explanations cannot adequately address. All 6 cases share characteristics that researchers have identified across hundreds of similar disappearances. The sudden vanishing, the failed dogs, the impossible locations, the survivors with memories that do not make sense. We do not claim to know what is happening. We do not claim to have answers. We only claim that the questions deserve to be asked, that the pattern deserves to be studied, that the families deserve better than silence and dismissal, that the children deserve to be remembered. Jaryd Atadero would be 30 years old now, if he had lived. He would be an adult, perhaps with children of his own, perhaps still hiking the mountains that he loved. Instead, his clothing was found turned inside out on an impossible mountainside, and no one has ever explained how it got there. Dior Kuntz Jr. would be 13 years old now, if he had lived. He would be in middle school, perhaps playing sports, perhaps discovering who he wanted to become. Instead, he vanished from a campsite in Idaho, and no one has ever explained where he went. The other children in our investigation deserve the same recognition, the same memory, the same demand for answers. They are not case numbers. They are not statistics. They are children who walked into the forest and did not walk out. And somewhere, in the wilderness that covers millions of acres of this country, something knows what happened to them. Something that has been there for a very long time. Something that will be there long after we are gone. Something that waits, in the silence, in the darkness, in the spaces between the trees, for the next child who wanders too far from the campsite. The next family that looks away for just a moment. The next victim of whatever lurks in the wild places of America. The wilderness keeps its secrets. The wilderness has always kept its secrets. And the children who vanish become part of those secrets. Forever. Gone. Without trace. Without explanation. Without hope. Until someone finds the courage to look for them. To ask the questions that no one wants to ask. To follow the evidence wherever it leads. Even into the darkness. Even into the unknown. Even into the places where children disappear and are never seen again.